I went to the.
Okay, you've got, let me test if your receivers are on. You can continue eating and you can still visit because it will take a few minutes and then only go out. So welcome to the Ghosts of R.K. Saleh tour. We'll be walking for the next 2 hours. Make sure that you've got water. If you need to use the toilet, make sure you've run to the toilet and come back. And somebody called me this afternoon and said, why ghosts? What are you going to show? I said the title was given only because everybody is dead, safely. And not one soul in this tour is alive. And they lived some time ago. And there is really very little of them left on this road as well. Now that I have shifted to this place, right, I live very close to this place, that I realize sometimes when I'm driving down or walking down, that at one time it must have been a completely different thoroughfare. And I have very vague memories of it as a child. Maybe I was 7 or 8, walking down this stretch at 7:30 or 8 in the evening. And I still remember there was not a single light and there was not a soul on the road. It was the loneliness that struck me then. All the houses deep inside and with very, very few lights and big gardens. And from there, in the course of, well, I was 7, I suppose in the last 40 and 45 odd years, it has completely transformed itself into a kind of a mini downtown. And there is not a trace of those families that lived here. They've all vanished. And Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan's house is the only marker that we have. And then a couple of houses closer to the Music Academy. That's all we have to indicate that there was a way of life that was very different. And I remember this from what people have told me, that the average property size when the plots were first laid out on this road was 5 to 8 acres. And today there is only one house that retains its entire acreage without parting even with 1 inch of it, and we'll go via that. Then it came down to 1 acre plots. Then it came down to 16 grounds, which is a little less than an acre, and 13 grounds. And then after that it came down to 5 grounds, and then it's like anything you may want to get. So 1,800 square feet, 500 square feet, 300 square feet, and so on and so on. But all this dwindling down only in the last 30 years. And even in the 1990s, there were bungalows called Windsor. There was a beautiful house called Manonidhi. Today we can't even recollect any of those houses. They've all been demolished and converted into multi-story buildings. And that is why I thought that this is a tour. And incidentally, this is not for most of my tours are done only once, but this one has been done 5 times so far. Because each time there's been a demand for it. I think the recent nostalgia is always a big calling. People like to talk about people who passed away in the last 50 years, 60 years, lots of memories of those personalities. And so this is the 5th time that I'm doing this tour. Now prior to it becoming Edward Elliot's Road and then Radhakrishnan Saleh, incidentally you can always track the period from which people residing on this road came from. Those who lived in it from the 1940s till the 1990s will continue referring to it as Edward Elliot's Road. And then those who came in the 1990s onwards call it Radhakrishnan Saleh. Today it's R.K. Saleh. And prior to that, from 1817, which is when the road was first laid, it was Cathedral Road. Because it was St. George's Cathedral that was the closest landmark, after which there was nothing. It was just a dirt track that led all the way to the beach. And can you believe it that in 1838, when the Freemasons wanted to build a Masonic hall, the best place that they could think of was down this road because it was lonely. And they wanted to have peace and quiet where they could practice their Masonic school. And so in 1838, when Lord Elphinstone, Mount Stuart Elphinstone becomes the governor of Madras, he is sent here for a very interesting reason. Queen Victoria had fallen in love with him and it was not going to happen. There was no wedding likely to happen with a mere aristocrat. You were looking for a king or a titular head from some other part of Europe. So they had to send him away to a place where he would be reasonably far away. So he was sent off as governor of Madras. So he comes over here and he was a Freemason. And he got the Masons over here to begin to work towards building a Masonic lodge for themselves. So between 1838 and 1840, they built this beautiful Masonic lodge just down the road by the sea. And the cost of the building initially, as like all good buildings, is given as 20,000 rupees. And then when constructed, it's 40,000 rupees. So the Masons have lost a lot of money in the process of the construction. And after the building is inaugurated, nobody wants to go there. Even the Masons are afraid because after dark, there is not a soul on this stretch. And if they have their Masonic dinners and go back, even the palanquin bearers are not willing to come there to take them to the great Chowdhury Plain, which is Mount Fort. So the Masons want to get rid of the property. And so they begin negotiating, they don't find a buyer. Finally, the police of Madras in the late 1840s, they offer to take it on rent. It's only the police that will move into such lonely locations. So the police then takes it on rent, and then by the 1860s, the police offer to buy the property of the Masons. The Masons, together with the land acquisition and the building, they've spent somewhere near 100,000 rupees. The police actually buy it at a discount because nobody wants the place. And that is how the police headquarters comes up at the corner of this road. And when you consider that that was a Masonic building, even today when you go there, you find that several elements of Freemasonry have survived in the building. So for instance, the staircase that leads you to the first floor where the director is exactly 33 steps in an anti-clockwise direction as is demanded in Freemasonry. Then the chamber of the police chief, even today, has got all the Masonic ornaments surrounding it done afterwards on the inside. So you can see the only thing that's gone is the beautiful white and black alternating marble square pattern flooring, because that was compulsory in masonry as well. The good and the bad coexist with each other, the white and the black. Because our government always believes that nothing is beautiful if you don't have red granite on it. He wrote a letter to President Wilson in the United States of America asking him as to how can it be possible that a country like the United States, which stands for freedom, can support an imperialist power like England during the First World War, when England has not yet given India freedom. And the letter was made public, and there was a hue and cry that a knight of the British Empire had written such a letter. Whereupon he returned his knighthood and he said that it would be better off without his appellation, and he became Dr. S. Subramania Iyer. So he lived in that particular property, and that really takes you, those were the two big properties that existed right up to the Buckingham Canal. And you must remember that prior to 1890, the Buckingham Canal had not even come here. Work began in 1887. It was only in the 1890s that the Buckingham Canal actually arrived at this particular place. Digging continued in the teeth of protest from Mylapore aristocrats. Leading the protest was V. Krishnaswamy Iyer, who said that we don't need the canal passing through this way because it will become a gutter in future. And there was, the counter was that the government said that it will be a navigable waterway for a long time. Well, you know whose words came true at the end of it, but we don't need to go into that one. Now we step out and let's come to the entrance of the city centre and see what was here before it became the city centre. Grand Imperial Darbar in 1911, and they placed the sash on him, the Commander of Indian Empire sash. The sash pierced his stomach and he was heavily diabetic, and that turned septic and he died within a few weeks of returning to Madras. Now he was particularly, V. Krishnaswamy Iyer had strongly opposed the sculpting of a statue for Sir T. Muthuswamy Iyer, the first Indian to become a judge of the Madras High Court. And there is a statue for him even today inside the High Court buildings. People place flowers on it. It is considered to be a kind of a deity for the High Court. V. Krishnaswamy Iyer had strongly protested against sculpting of a statue. Now when he died at the age of 49, the people in Madras felt that V. Krishnaswamy Iyer needed a statue, and they began collecting funds for it. And the Hindu strongly protested against the fact that a statue should be put up for a man who did not like statues being put up. And then a public meeting was held where Sir S. Subramania Iyer spoke very warmly in favor of V. Krishnaswamy Iyer getting a statue. And finally he broke down and wept, because for him he was a kind of a son who had died several years earlier than him. The Hindu wrote a scathing editorial the next day saying it's very sad to see a sitting judge, or not a sitting judge, by then he had retired judge of the High Court, expressing emotion in public to this extent. But his word held good, money was collected, and finally the statue came up for V. Krishnaswamy Iyer on the outside the university building. Next to that is Sir S. Subramania Iyer's statue, so they are almost cheek by jowl next to each other. Now, one of the very interesting features of Madras is that everywhere you go you will find an old street called Firewood Go Down Street. And the Firewood Go Down Street was very, very important. Today they are all forgotten, they have all been given other names, most common name being Ambedkar Street or VOC Street, and etc, etc. You have got several streets like that coming up. But the Firewood Go Down Street was one of the most important streets, because the city had a great appetite for firewood, and it was not just for cooking. Cooking was the smallest requirement, but all the steam powered presses which were operating here, you know, the earlier years of industrialization, the harbour works, the railway locomotives, all of them ran on firewood, and the firewood was coming in by canal. And so the canal was actually carrying 70,000 tons of firewood every year into Madras city. That was the volume of the firewood that was coming, and everywhere that wherever the canal flowed, there was a firewood bank stall that was set up. So this was the biggest firewood bank stall for South Madras. This particular location where we are standing today, this is where everybody came to buy casuarina wood in order to keep their kitchen fires burning, in order to keep the factories running. So everything, wherever steam power and cooking was required, this is where people came to collect the firewood. And then in 1917, you had a very, very interesting meeting over here. Madras, the early years of Madras was all about Brahmin domination. The Brahmins had taken to education, they had joined the law profession, they had got into the universities, they had got into the government jobs. It was but natural that there was going to be a counter. And that is when some of the most prominent members of the non-Brahmin community for the first time held a meeting. And the meeting was led by a man whose name would be given to that street that you see going down on that side. C. Natesa Mudaliar, that is even today known as Natesan Road, Dr. C. Natesan Road. That meeting happened here. And this is where Pitti Tyagaraya Chetty, C. Natesa Mudaliar and Dr. T. M. Nair, these were the three people who got together to begin what was called the Justice Party. And the Justice Party started at this particular location. From then the Justice Party gets on. Today, you know, the self-respect movement comes out of the Justice Party in the 1930s. Post that, you have the Dravida Karagam, then you have the Dravida Munnetra Karagam, then the Anna Dravida Munnetra Karagam. Practically everything began at this spot. This was the birthplace of the entire movement that has fashioned Tamil Nadu politics, and in a way it's fashioned national politics as well over a long period of time. So now let's come out of what was once Tennanthopu and Verahu Kada, and then we move on to see who were the others who lived on this stretch. Okay, so now we come to the time when Edward Elliot's road was laid out, and so we begin with who was Edward Elliot. Edward Elliot was really the first police commissioner of Madras. He was also, rather strangely, the magistrate in charge of keeping the law in the city. He was also the police commissioner. But then when your father is the governor of Madras, you can hold any position. So the father was Lord Sir Hugh Elliot, who was governor of Madras. The son, Edward Elliot, was two positions combined into one. Now all was going well. Edward Elliot was technically a bachelor, and he would have remained a bachelor in public view had not one day Mrs. Isabella Napier with her youngest child and an ayah in tow come in a horse carriage all the way from Porchavakam and landed in front of the St. George's Cathedral, which is just down this road. And there was another carriage waiting for her. Having got into that carriage, she instructed the cab driver to take her to the house of Mr. Edward Elliot, which was on the Adyar. So the carriage came down this way, and then having turned the corner where Mr. Edward Elliot had his office incidentally, he must have probably come out and seen her going by from the veranda.
She then drove to the Adyar, and then they lived as husband and wife, or rather man and woman, much to the delight of everybody in Madras. The only person who was a little offended was the husband, Colonel Johnston Napier. Now he had already got 2 children from her. The third child had been taken away by her in the coach. So he then files for restitution of conjugal rights. And in the meantime, the lady, the servants of the house are all called in the divorce proceedings. Now in those days, divorce has to be given by the Privy Council in London. The local courts don't have the powers to grant divorce because it has to go all the way to London. So from London, the instruction comes that you will have to interview all the servants to find out the sleeping arrangements in the new house. So Ghafoor Sahib, the butler, Veerata Tannikarachi, that is, she is the one who's taking the water, and then Ibrahim Sahib, the Khansama, these all become celebrities overnight. Everybody knows Ghafoor Sahib and others because they are all going to go and give evidence in court. And then they talk about how they sleep in separate rooms, he on the first floor and she on the ground floor. But then there is a staircase that connects the two, but we sleep outside and so on. Now in the midst of all this evidence, Mrs. Napier is pregnant for the 4th time. So the question is now raised as who is the father of the child. Once again the matter is referred up to the Privy Council in London. Finally it's got too hot for everybody and they grant the divorce, saying that divorce is granted, and the document is very nice. It says Mr. Edward Elliot had carnal knowledge of her body, she being of a lascivious temperament, and so on and so forth. As usual, the woman was blamed left, right and centre, the man was let off to a certain extent. Johnston Napier was given full right to marry and raise a family once again, but Isabella was not allowed to marry Edward Elliot. But when your father is the governor of Madras, so the marriage was solemnized a few months later in St. George's Cathedral. Everybody lived happily ever after. One son born out of the marriage of the Elliots finally becomes the judge of the Baroda High Court during the time of Sayaji Rao of Gaikwad of Baroda. So I did all this research and wrote this detailed article and said it's very ironic that the road was named, the very road that was named after him was the road through which the woman must have fled that morning. And 3 months later, I get an email from a man in London saying I am the great grandson born out of that child that was born when my great grandmother was living with Edward Elliot. And we have always assumed that we were born of Mr. Edward Elliot only, but now you have thrown new light on the story and tell us what is the source of all this. So then I sent him all the links from where I had downloaded the matter and so on. And then, we've been in touch with each other ever since. Sometime when he comes down to Madras, I hope to meet him. By the 1910s, the road had been laid out and it had acquired its present contours, and it had become a very aristocratic locality of Madras. People who had a lot of money, only they could come and settle down over here. The church owned a significant portion of this stretch, very, very significant portion. In fact, they say that even the Maratoti was carved out of Church of South India, church property, and then starting from here, going up to the end of this block is the first stretch of the church property on this road. And very interestingly, you have what is called the CSI Kalyani Hospital over here, but we'll come to that a little later. Before that, by the 1940s, lots of interesting people had begun to settle on this particular road. And one of the very famous people who came and lived here were the Travancore sisters, Lalita, Padmini and Ragini, and their redoubtable mother Saraswati Ammal. And so the building that you see next, which is where the bank is, the Bandhan Bank, that is where Padmini lived. And the street down, which is R.K. Salai 9th Street, that is where Lalita and Ragini had their houses. Their brother had a house. They owned several properties on that particular stretch. We'll move a little ahead. I think the smell is a little overpowering, but from now on there'll be smell for a long period of time. Now on your WhatsApp, I have already put up a photograph of MLV, ML Vasanta Kumari, around the time when she must have shifted here, which was in the early 1950s. Vasanta Kumari, whose mother was Madras Lalitangi, Brahmin woman who was given in adoption to a Devadasi family, later becomes the consort of Ayyaswamy Iyer, a musician who was more a guru than a performing musician, and their only child was Vasanta Kumari, born in the 1920s. In my opinion, and in that of Keshav, who is here, she was the most brilliant musician we have ever had in the field of Carnatic music. There was nobody else. I mean, we've had very intelligent, we've had people who were almost Vasanta Kumari, but Vasanta Kumari was of a different category altogether. Vasanta Kumari says that at the age of 3, whenever people sang, all that registered in her mind were the notes behind the lyrics. So everything in her mind was processed as swaras, even when people were singing a song. So she knew what were the notes that were going in, and that was the level of brilliance of this woman. And by the 1940s, her mother was frequently plagued by asthma. So in a particular concert in Bangalore, the mother is unable to take to the stage. When the organizers say, we've already sold tickets, your daughter is here, she's just 13. This is 1941, Vasanta Kumari was born in 1928. Get her onto stage. And so the billboards announce her name as Madras Lalitangi Vasanta Kumari, because they want to announce the continuity between the mother and the daughter. So she becomes the MLV. By the 1946-47, she's become a top-ranking concert artist, and M.K. Tyagaraja Bhagavathar has just come out of prison after the Lakshmikantam murder, and he wants to make a new movie which will become a super hit, or at least he thinks so, and he wants a fresh voice for the female lead V.N. Janaki, who is MGR's wife, or rather will be his wife in a few years from then. And they approach, on the recommendation of Papanasam Sivan, they approach Vasanta Kumari's father. The father is very reluctant to get his daughter to sing for films, because she's acted in one movie which was a very unhappy experience for her. And he says, if you pay 1,000 rupees for a song, this is 1946, we'll accept. And Tyagaraja Bhagavathar says yes. So Vasanta Kumari gets on to becoming a playback singer. The film Rajamukti is an absolute dud, but Vasanta Kumari's voice is noticed. And thereafter, till date, she remains the only Carnatic musician who balanced a film career with a top-ranking Carnatic career with a film career for 25 years from then. No, 20 years. Actually, her last song was sung in 1975. So 30 years in effect was really her film career along with her Carnatic career. So when she started singing playback, hers was a little deep voice, and Padmini's voice was the closest. So in effect, she became virtually the playback for Padmini, and they became very close friends. So once Padmini moved here, Vasanta Kumari had to move into this property. The one that you see opposite, which is today Transworld Singapore and Transworld House. This was a house called Vidya Shankar, because Vasanta Kumari's children, Sri Vidya and Shankar Raman. So that's how the house was named as Vidya Shankar. And this is where she lived with her absolutely useless husband Vigadam Krishnamurthy, the mother Lalitangi and the father Ayyasami Iyer. 4 out of the 4 people, 3 had no idea about financial management. Lalitangi was the only one who kept everything under a tight watch. In 56, Lalitangi dies, and thereafter nobody has a clue as to how the money is coming in, how the money is going out. And GNB is her music guru, of course. But even when he is flourishing, she has also begun to flourish. She's become a great artist. One fine morning, Bade Ghulam Ali Khan comes to Madras, and he knocks on this door, and they open the door, and he says, I can't think of going and living in any other house except yours. And so he comes in, and they vacate the entire first floor for Bade Ghulam Ali Khan. He stays here. Non-vegetarian food has to be supplied to him. Now this is a vegetarian house. So there is a back staircase through which meat is supplied, and Bade Ghulam cooks his own food. And he stays right through. He makes 2 visits to Madras. Both the visits he stays only here, because he says, other than Vasanta Kumari, there's no other musician of her stature with whom I can comfortably stay. And then they both travel to Bombay together from here by train. And then you have these tunnels in the Ghat section, right? So they have a game which they play, and imagine if only we were there at that time to witness it. For every tunnel, one would sing swaras, and the other would keep the beat, and then the next one would sing the swaras till the exhaustion of that particular tunnel. And then they go off to wherever they had to. Now, Vasanta Kumari, of course, had no idea that there were things like income tax and stuff like that. So eventually the house is auctioned. It's brought to auction in the 1960s. Thereafter, she never ever stays in a house that she owned. It was always a rented property, and a great decline financially, but amazingly, a great elevation musically. Till the end, one of those musicians who never declined. You know, her imagination was always top notch, and I don't think there was ever a concert. She may have been physically weak, she may have been off key on certain times, but there was never a bad concert of Vasanta Kumari. We never came away feeling, what did she sing today? It wasn't up to the mark. It never happened. Anyway, that was her house, and this was Padmini's house. And before we move from here, maybe there should be one song which she has sung for Padmini, and you'll watch Padmini dancing. Cut the first few seconds because it's lousy, but after that it becomes very, very nice. And that is Adal Kaniro in the movie Madurai Veeran. Where she sings for Padmini, and the song is in Charukeshi. So you can watch it later if you don't feel like doing it now. The very interesting thing is that Srividya wanted to become a dancer because the three women on the next house were dancers. And Vasanta Kumari's husband, who was a net zero in life, he was not very keen about it. But Vasanta Kumari was all encouraging, and it was Padmini's mother who tied the salangai to Srividya's feet. And then Srividya becomes a great dancer and a film actress as well, and we know that story. Much later, Vasanta Kumari would move to Rishi Valley, where she would teach children music, and then from there she would come and perform. Anyway, she had a very sad life, but a very musically enriching life. That was her house. And this was Padmini's, as I said, and somebody told me the other day, I can tell you all those who came to visit Padmini by car, and you know what that meant, right? But I can tell you of a story of my uncle, who was a double amputee. He had lost both his legs to diabetes. He was living in the United States. So in the 1990s, he comes down to Madras with great difficulty, and then I'm speaking to him one day, and then I ask him, is there some place that you would like to go? He says, I want to see Padmini's house. I was all taken aback. I said, what the hell, Padmini's house? No, you don't know what a landmark it was for all of us when we were growing up. So I brought him up to this point. This building had been demolished, it had become a bank. So he sits in the car and lets out one huge sigh. And then he says, okay, we'll go. And so we went back. So I think that was the hold that Padmini had over several of these people. Anyway, let's move ahead. Okay, now we are standing in the shadow of the CSI Kalyani Hospital, not the E.V. Kalyani nursing home. So there are two of them. CSI Kalyani by itself has a very interesting history. So in the 1840s in Nagapattinam, there is a poor Brahmin boy, Nagapattinam Subramaniam, N. Subramaniam, whose parents cannot afford an education for him. Just see the will and the kind of determination that he had to succeed. So when he was 10, he runs away to Madras in the 1850s. Comes here and joins the Wesleyan school, which is in Royapeta, gets converted to Christianity without telling his parents, studies at the Wesleyan school, and then becomes a teacher in the 1860s in the Wesleyan school itself. Then realizes that law is the profession that he should get into, and begins to qualify in the law in Madras at that time. Then begins practicing as a lawyer, but realizes that he needs to be a barrister. So goes to London to study, to enroll in the Inner Temple, comes back in the 1880s and begins practicing as a barrister. His name is N. Subramaniam, and by early 1900s has become the Advocate General, Government of Madras, official trustee, assignee of the High Court of Madras, and all the British lawyers object because and even the estate holders, the British estate holders object because they say an Indian has no business administering our estates. But he, breaks through all those barriers, becomes a highly successful practitioner of the law, and also becomes the Advocate General, Government of Madras. His mother discovers, much to her heartbreak, that he is no longer a Hindu. His children are all named George Subramaniam, David Subramaniam, and so on and so forth. And so the mother and the son are not on speaking terms. Finally, in 1910, when he realizes that he has very little time left on this earth and he is going to die the next year, he endorsed the church with a lot of money on the instructions that a hospital should be set up over here. The hospital already exists, it's come up in 1901, but he endorsed it with a lot of money and names it after his mother. That is how it's called the CSI Kalyani Hospital, Church of South India Kalyani Hospital. Subramaniam was apparently a very short individual. He was just 4 feet 9 inches. And so particularly in the admissions court, which used to happen in the sessions court in those days, I believe the judge used to sit on a platform that was 6 feet or 5 feet high. On top of that, they'd put a chair and a bench, and then judge would be sitting on top of it. So Justice Oldfield from there, I believe, said, "Where is the advocate on record?" And so there is this voice that is piping up from somewhere down below. "Can you be a little louder?" So then he starts speaking a little louder and he says, "Can you see me, your lordship?" He says, "No, I hear a voice, but I don't see you. Please stand up on the bench and continue with your argument." But Subramaniam was a man who knew his sense of propriety, and he refused to stand on the bench, and he continued arguing from the floor level. But imagine standing up to a British judge in those days and managing to hold on, even though his personality was highly diminutive, and that was the man that endorsed this. Today, not one of the Subramaniam family lives in Madras. They don't live in India at all. All of them are in the United States. But you must have heard of this music group called the Grub Quintet, of which Ravi Santosham is one of them. There is a George Subramaniam in that, and he is one of the descendants of this Diwan Bahadur N. Subramaniam family. Let's go ahead. This again was carved out of church property, and of course it was named Hotel President. No prizes for guessing why, because Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan's house was just diagonally opposite, so that's how it comes up. It's one of the early so-called luxury hotels of the city, though I've been inside and I can't agree with that definition. But behind this and next to it is AVM Avenue, once again carved out of church property, and that is one of the big success stories of Madras city. But prior to that, I just want to draw your attention to the Yes Bank building that you see there. That was an old house called Sumukta, and we'll come to the history of Sumukta shortly. Some very interesting history there, but we'll come to that a little later. But when we look back at AVM Avenue, 1 acre, so you can see that this is all 1950s and later, by which time much of the property divisions have already begun happening over here. A.V. Meyyappa Chettiar buys it for building 4 bungalows for himself and for 3 of his sons. But Meyyappan's story itself is something that is worth recounting, as is that of his very illustrious neighbor S.S. Vasan. But we'll come to Vasan a little later, but before that, Meyyappan, because his house is first. Meyyappan came from a fairly well-to-do Chettiar family in Karaikudi. The father was running a departmental store, Avicii and Sons, where Meyyappan, like all good Chettiars, by the time he is 7, is made to join the family business. By the time he is 15, he's kind of revolutionized the shop, the way the shop is run, because all Chettiars on the first birthday of their children will celebrate it in a grand fashion. They'll go about ordering gifts for all the guests. He transformed the shop into a place where you could come and place an order for all the gifts, and he would arrange it. So you don't need to go to buy this from here, that from there, this from here and all that. And he was the pioneer of the take-home gift. That is, you came to him and you said, "I want a gift hamper to be made," though they didn't use these words. A gift hamper to be made for every guest who comes. This is to have 1 piece of badam, 1 biscuit packet, 1 kunguma chimil, 1 blouse piece, etc., etc. And he would ensure on that particular day you went to his shop and picked up exactly the number of bags you wanted, you paid him and you left. So this is how the shop became successful. By the time he was in his 20s, he had realized that gramophone records were the big thing. And so he enters into, can you believe, Chettiar in Karaikudi writing to Odeon and Company in Germany, saying that I have great scope for representing you over here, and becomes their distributor for South India and starts selling Odeon records. And then tells them that, look at what HMV is doing, they are recording Indian artists. So you need to start an Indian recording facility. So where do we go? You come to me, I'll run the recording facility for you. So start Saraswati stores in Madras, whereby gramophone records will be recorded here, they'll be sent to Germany, they'll be pressed over there, and then they'll come back. This goes on. Then in 1931, movies begin to talk, and he realizes that he has to get into movie production and starts what is called Saraswati Movie Production House, or some such name, but Saraswati something something something. And with a group of reluctant partners who think that this is the sure shot way of losing all your money, they make a film called Alli Arjuna, with the hero being K.S. Ananthanarayana Iyer. They go to Calcutta, they shoot the film, they come back, it's gone into production, it's going to be released, and then they realize that the hero has acted right through with his eyes shut, because the lights were so powerful that he couldn't keep his eyes open, and none of them noticed it because they were standing at, in those days the camera recorded voice live, right? There was no dubbing, and so they couldn't be there when the acting was going on, so they were at some distance. In the brightness of the light, they never saw. The film was an absolute dud, so partners leave. So now he starts a new company. You know why? Of course, tax liabilities were there in the old company, so you start a new company. This is called Pragati Talkie Production House or some such thing. Makes a second movie with a brand new camera and realizes that this is going to be the best film possible. And I forget the name of the film, but at the end of it, when the movie is going to be released, they realized that they never knew how the sound would come from the camera, live recording once again. So there's huge time lag between the acting and the sound. So people have moved their lips, and then after 5 minutes the words begin to come onto screen. Film is an absolute dud. Once again, film company broken up, but doesn't want to give up. Makes Pragati Movie House, third film, makes a movie called Nanda Kumar. This time everything is okay, but the film just about breaks even, and then comes the Second World War. Everybody is fleeing Madras. So his partners say that, we can't do anything over here, but he convinces them and he says, you can all leave, I'll start a production house by myself. And he rents a building which nobody wants to get into. That's called Admiralty House in Mandavali, where the Maharaja of Vijayanagaram has committed suicide by jumping off the rooftop. So they believe that his ghost is, incidentally that's the only ghost in this walk. And so his ghost is supposed to have been roaming around in that particular place. And nobody wants to go there, but he goes. And he says, because they are going to give it to him at a throwaway price because nobody is wanting to rent it. And the Raja's family is so keen to leave the place that they have left behind priceless Ravi Varmas and cut glass and jade and all that because they don't want it. They just want to get back. So he tells them that I have made a list of everything that you wanted, that you've left behind over here. I'll keep it in one room very safely for you. I'll charge you a rent of 75 rupees for keeping that. So out of the 250 rupees that he is supposed to pay them, there's a rebate of 75 rupees given. And then they make a movie called Poli Panchali and Vayadi. It's a twin movie. Two movies together. It's a comedy. Both are comedies. Becomes a super duper hit. And then they make Bhu Kailas, which is a bigger hit. And then the Second World War breaks out and they have to leave Madras. So he rents a studio in Devakotai, where from the Zamindar of Devakotai, and he starts a studio there. Now the Zamindar is watching him make money, so he jacks up the rent every year. So Meyyappan says that this is not the place, I must start my own studio. By 1947 comes to Madras and acquires land in Vadapayani. And why does he acquire land in Vadapayani? Because the power stations have all come up and there is surplus power over there and there is no noise. Today you can't believe it, of course. And land was available for a song, and that is how he starts his AVM studios. And realizes that independence is just around the corner, decides to make a film with a patriotic theme. There was no risk in producing it, right? Because independence was going to come in any case. So you want to make a film with a patriotic theme now. And Bharatiyar's copyright is lying with a jeweler called Surajmal. Goes to him, gives him 10,000 rupees and buys the copyright of Bharatiyar's songs. Bharatiyar's family had no money. They'd sold the songs to Surajmal for 10,000 bucks. And buys it off them and produces a film called Nami River, where every song is sung by D.K. Patamal and all the songs are by Subramanya Bharati. Released in 1946, by which time, you get into the water when you are able to see the depth of it. So there is no, independence is assured, so nobody is going to take any action on you. Film becomes a huge success. And then Bharati's family wakes up, Surajmal wakes up, everybody wants a share in the pie because they were given Bharati's family in particular wants a share out of the money. And they approach the government. And Avinashalingam Chettiar, who is the education minister, approaches Meyyappan and tells him that I want you to give Bharatiyar's family some compensation, or the government will acquire the rights for Bharati's. So Meyyappan says, if you are willing to pay 1 lakh, I am willing to give it to you. Avinashalingam Chettiar just smiles at him and says, we'll pay the 1 lakh. But remember that the wrath of the government will descend on you if you are going to charge money for this. So Meyyappan hands over the rights for free. He can see that his knees will be nailed to the ground if he charges any money. He hands it over free. Then the Bharati's copyright is nationalized. Today anybody can sing Bharati, nobody can prevent it. Then Meyyappan writes, that the government requested me and I gave it to them free. He never ever mentions the fact that he was going to charge 1 lakh for it. The government twisted his arm into parting with it free. The government minutes were only released last year when A.R. Venkatachalapathy wrote a book, Who Owns Bharati's Copyrights? And it's only from that you get to realize all the negotiations that went behind. But Meyyappan portrayed himself as a great nationalist, as a saint, a man who had resurrected. So he knew always how to come up on the winning side. And that is where that remarkably intelligent man lived. Just down next is AVM Avenue, which is a private street. That is technically R.K. Saleh First Street, because there is only an R.K. Saleh Second Street. This is R.K. Saleh First Street, where Meyyappan lived and lived happily ever after. Almost every film that he made was a great success. Whatever Vasan did, Meyyappan did. Vasan released films in Telugu, Meyyappan did it. Vasan released films in Hindi, Meyyappan did it. They both, between them and Nagi Reddy a little later, they proved to North Indian film producers and directors that this was a place where you could make Hindi films and it could be as successful. Bal Thackeray was so enraged by the fact that these Tamil directors and producers were making money on what was happening over there. Meyyappan walks to meet Bal Thackeray in Bombay one morning, has breakfast with him and says, everything is fine. You can order that films made in Madras, Hindi films should not be screened. But think of the number of Marathi distributors who will become insolvent because of this. Think of the number of Hindi film actors, extras, light boys, theatre operators who will lose money. Thackeray lifts the ban and says you can release all the films. This is the kind of man that Meyyappan was. He could go and fight with anybody, express his point of view and make them see what was good from his point of view as well. Let's go further. Now, like all successful men, Meyyappan had a very, very powerful wife. And that was his second wife. He had parted ways with his first wife and the children whom he had had through her by settling houses in Karaikudi and Balaji Nagar and all on them, and then met up with Rajeshwari, who was his second wife, several years younger, not a Chettiar woman, a Saurashtra lady, a Patnulu lady, and from whom he had all the children who would become famous in the world of films. Now in 1951, they are making a film called Parashakti, and A.S.A. Sami is the director, Meyyappan is the producer, Karunanidhi is the dialogue writer, and Shivaji Ganesan is acting in the film. Halfway through the movie, the distributors come and say, nobody will touch this film, because this actor is the most unimpressive creature we have ever seen. He is so thin, he's got pop eyes, and he's got such a dramatic way of rendering dialogue, and he speaks in a high-flown Tamil that nobody can understand. We are used to GNB, MK Tyagaraja Bhagadar kind of Tamil. Ava Uduva, Iva Varuva. Vishwamitrarnu ஒரு ரிஷி இருக்காரோ இல்லையோ அவரை கொஞ்சம் தரிசனம் பண்ணிட்டு வந்துடலாம். That kind of Tamil is what was being spoken in Tamil cinema before that. And Meyyappan began to have cold feet. He began to develop cold feet and he decided to cancel Parashakti midway. There were three people who stood steadfast against this decision. One was A.S.A. Sami, second was Karunanidhi, and the third was Rajeshwari, who kept telling him that if you stop this production, it will be the biggest mistake you will ever make in your life. And of course, Rajeshwari had the biggest voice among the three. And the film was produced, the film became an outstanding hit. It launched Shivaji, it also transformed the way we made Tamil cinema thereafter. We became very dialogue oriented, less music oriented, less religious, Raja Rani type of, more social in whatever we were doing. And every October 1st, which was Shivaji's birthday, he would visit three places. One was A.S.A. Sami's family, one was Mu Karunanidhi, then he would come here. And after Meyyappan had died, even later he would fall at Rajeshwari's feet on every birthday, never forgot. And he would always say that Anda Amma Vandi, if she had not, given me that break, I would have been a nobody in this field. And so that remarkable lady also lived inside over here. You see a photograph of a man in a turban, and that is a black and white photograph, unfortunately. But if you had seen it in color, this turban would have been in glorious pink. He was always known for wearing a pink turban wherever he went. Dr. E.V. Srinivasan, ophthalmologist, one of the pioneers in cataract surgery in Madras, and one of the most brutal doctors, had no bedside manner. So if you went to him and said, you know, doctor, my eye is throbbing since yesterday, just lie down, I'll have it plucked out, and then you will not have any trouble thereafter. This was the kind of bedside manner that Dr. Srinivasan had. And he also believed that the lens that gets opaque over a period of time is high in protein apparently. So he would pluck it out after the surgery, get the patient to open their mouth and put it in and say, swallow it, it's good for you. This kind of an absolute nutcase, but one of the greatest eye surgeons possible in the city. And his father was a Tahsildar who acquired everything starting from here and going down, going all the way behind up to what is called Dwarka Colony, which opens out on Royapeta High Road. So there is a gate, there used to be a gate behind through which you could actually, if you walk down this road, then take a left and then take a right, and then you could have a gate through which you went out into Dwarka Colony, but that's gone now. There's a wall that divides the whole thing. So in 1916 or so, E.V. Srinivasan moves in over here. His brother has half the property, he has half the property, several grounds. Srinivasan's daughter, Kalyani, becomes a child widow. She's just 10 or 11 when her husband dies. And Srinivasan, contrary to, she was born in 1908. So we are looking at somewhere near 1918, 1919. And he says, I'm not going to get the head of my daughter shaved, and she is going to be educated and she is going to become a doctor, like the way I am. So the whole family, which has been a joint family till then, they all object and they say that we will ostracize you, we will have nothing to do with you because you've gone against Dharma. So he writes a letter to his elder brother, which is still preserved in the family, where he says that between my daughter's future and religion, I will side with my daughter. And so they build a wall and he builds a house for himself and his family, educates his daughter, who then becomes a gynecologist. The first, in the family it is claimed that she was the first Indian woman obstetrician and gynecologist. I do not know what the differentiation between a plain gynecologist and an obstetrician gynecologist is, but she becomes that for Madras city, works in the general hospital, and then finally starts her own nursing home over here. Because this was CSI Kalyani, that becomes E.V. Kalyani Nursing Home, because that was her name. And even today that remains a functioning nursing home, with her grand nieces-in-law Uma Ram, and then her nieces-in-law Uma Ram, and then earlier Geeta Arjun, all of them running that particular hospital. So E.V. Kalyani practiced practically till the end of her life, when she was 93 or whatever it was. Stopped just a few years prior to that, and she passed on some of her father's bedside manners to herself and then to some of her junior doctors as well. I know this for a fact because Dr. Lakshmi Kumari was one of the juniors of E.V. Kalyani, and my wife was one of Lakshmi Kumari's famous patients, in the sense that every consultation would come back in a flood of tears. I will not go back. Why am I pregnant? I don't want to go back to this lady doctor. She's one of the nastiest women I've ever met. And my mother-in-law's consolation to my wife was, you haven't met E.V. Kalyani, my dear. This is nothing in comparison. And so, anyway, the first delivery went like that, but the second delivery went like a dream, with the same Lakshmi Kumari, completely transformed and behaving like an angel right through. But we always knew that lurking somewhere behind was this great withering, this scalding acid tongue. So I had a junior officer and he, his wife was not getting pregnant, so he said, what do? I sent him off by mistake to Dr. Kalyani. So he takes his wife there, and then she says, everything is all right with your wife. Not Kalyani, she goes to Lakshmi Kumari, and then Lakshmi Kumari tells my assistant's wife, everything is all right with you. But how can you marry this weedy, thin specimen? He cannot give you a child. And so this fellow comes back with a severe inferiority complex. And then he tells me, "Enna sir, indha amma ippadi pesranga." So I said, okay. So I'm sure somewhere along the line, all these things must have been passed down from one doctor to the other. And then there's this other famous story about this woman in strong labor screaming, "Spread your legs, amma. I'm not able to do it, doctor. Anniki idha solli irukano. Ippo idha solli enna prayojanam." Let's go ahead. And that was Dr. Kalyani's house. The house was demolished and divided into two plots, and then we bought one and we built our house, and we've named it Kalyani because of this pioneering lady, because we felt that she deserved some marker to herself. That's why the house has been named after her. Anyway, we move ahead. And the first one was called Kaustubha. then there was Srivatsa, then there was Sadhana, and then there was Srinivasa. They were the 4 houses that stood within that one compound, all part of the same family. So Venkatrama Shastriyar's office used to be in the first house, and then he used to have his house in the second bungalow. The third and the fourth were occupied by 2 of his sons-in-law. And in his time, he's supposed to have been the most polished lawyer. When he began expounding, the judge would come under a kind of a mesmeric spell, and thereafter would only listen to what he had to say and would never pay any attention to what the opponent was trying to say. So he was one of the most deathly opponents that you could have in court cases. And of course, very, very powerful daughters, 4 of them, of whom several stories can be said, but I am not going to get into all that. But 2 sons, T.V. Ramamurthy and T.V. Rajagopalan. T.V. Ramamurthy was an insurance actuary and happily married to one of T.R. Venkatrama Shastriyar's granddaughters, and the lady died early. He was a great tennis player, and one day crossed the road and announced that he was in love with the lady on the opposite side and got married to her. You remember the house called Sumukta that I pointed out to you? Sumukta means Nalla Muthu. Nalla Muthu Ramamurthy was the sister of Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy, and she was the principal of the Queen Mary's College at that time. Came from a very, very strong Devadasi family which rebelled against the Devadasi system. Both of them were daughters of Gemini Ganeshan's grand uncle, and they were brought up in Pudukkottai. The elder sister Muthulakshmi wanted to become a doctor. The father said that he would educate her in the Raja's College in Pudukkottai. When there was a public protest because the parents felt that their pure and innocent Brahmin boys would get highly contaminated by the presence of a Devadasi woman, girl studying there. The Raja had to actually legislate to allow Muthulakshmi Reddy to study in that particular school. Having studied there, she then comes and joins the Madras Medical College, qualifies as a doctor, goes back to practice in Pudukkottai. The mother is very apprehensive because there is no way the girl is going to get married. Then she lays down a condition saying that she'll only marry a man who is a doctor and who will come down to Pudukkottai and practice along with her. Now Pudukkottai didn't have enough people even for one doctor. Where is the question of a second doctor coming along? But Dr. Sundara Reddy, who is a very well-known doctor in Madras, packs up his practice and arrives in Pudukkottai and says, I am willing to get married and I will live here with you. So the 2 of them get married, they live in Pudukkottai for some time. Then gently he coaxes her into coming to Madras. She finally arrives here. Having come here, joins the Madras Legislative Council, first woman member of the Madras Legislative Council, first woman to become the Deputy Speaker of the Madras Legislative Council, all in 1 year. And then that same year brings in the anti-Devadasi bill to prevent Devadasi system being continued in this presidency. Her sister had to be equally, if not more powerful, so qualifies, becomes the physical fitness instructress in Queen Mary's College, and then goes on to become the principal of the college. So T.V. Ramamurthy crosses the road and goes and gets married to Nalla Muthu, much to the heartbreak of the rest of the family, who believes that he's kind of soiled the family escutcheon by doing this. But then, you know, over a period of time, peace is restored between 2 sides of R.K. Sala. It must have been the Agraharam war of its time. I can imagine T.R. Venkatrama Shastri murmuring curses and imprecations from this side, the son from that side, and so on. The second son, T.V. Rajagopalan, becomes the secretary of the Music Academy. So in his time, he was one of the 4 evil secretaries of the Music Academy. Now present company continues that tradition, so to speak. But he never practiced. For a father who was so powerful in the law, the son spent all his time in the Music Academy. And so naturally the wealth of the family kept spiraling downwards over a period of time. The front portion was the first to be sold, and that became the house of E.V. Saroja, at one time a very, very well-known actress. And then it became Yoga Lakshmi Kalyana Mandapam, and then it became a property that reputedly was acquired by the Marans. And then Jayalalitha kept watching it as she went up and down the road, so naturally all development stalled on that property, and it remains a ghostly building thereafter. 2 of the old bungalows still survive on the backside. 2 surviving bungalows on R.K. Salai. One is Girija, which you see over there, and Girija is the house of Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. And I don't have to talk much about Dr. Radhakrishnan. He is well known to all of us. And his son Sarvapalli Gopal, one of the greatest historians we've had in India, known for his fine biography of Nehru and then his biography of his father, one of the most remarkably frank biographies. In Indian tradition, if you wanted to write a biography, you would say that they were born because God came in the night and blessed the mother, and then they did everything due to divine intervention. They got up in the morning and shaved, God came and met them. Then they sat down to eat, God came and met them. Then they went out, they never did anything evil in their whole life. This is how, and then finally God comes and takes them away in a fiery chariot. This is the Indian way of writing a biography. Gopal was so very frank in his father's biography that I remember when my wife's grandfather was gifted a copy, he said, "Che, ipriyelama ezhuduvan paiyan ava appa patti," and he didn't like it one bit. But anyway, but this, I mean, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan deserves a walk by himself, but I just have to say that this is probably a house to which every great leader of his time or her time must have come and gone. And this is also sadly where he declined as a great intellect. This man who was the greatest brain, one of the greatest brains that India produced, the last 5 years of his life was a complete blank. He did not know where he was. This is where he lived. And opposite, and he writes a great tribute about this house. He says, every night when I would go to sleep, the headlights of a car flashing down the road would wake me up. No, the headlights of a car coming out of the driveway of this house would wake me up. And I would see that somebody is going out to work in the dead of night. At 4 o'clock in the morning when I got up, I would see this man coming back in his car and driving into the compound. This was S.S. Vasan's house. And this was called Sudarshan. And this great man writing a tribute about this remarkable personality and writing about the way he worked. Vasan's mother sold idlis on the railway platform in Trichy, and Vasan would go and sell magazines every time a train halted. The mother wanted the son to get a college education, school education and college education. Son had other ideas and said, I will go to Madras where I will earn a fortune. Don't save money for me for a college education. So cycled all the way from Trichy to Madras, and having come here, enters various small businesses, starts a mail order cataloging service which becomes a little successful, wants to advertise for the mail order in a magazine called the Merry Magazine, also known as the Ananda Vigadan, and goes to meet Pudur Vaidyanatha Iyer, the publisher, and he says, I'm sorry, there is no money for bringing out the next issue. Vasan says, I'll buy the magazine. Has no money. Writes a book called Illara Vazhkaiyin Ragasiyangal, The Secrets of a Happy Married Life. Everybody thinks it's a sex book and they all buy it. And then they discover that it's full of great advice on, how you should be happy with your wife, you should do puja in the morning, remember to brush your teeth, don't encourage bad breath or body odor and stuff like that. But he's made his money and he buys the Ananda Vigadan. And that is how he starts. It's like, selling one of those chess books as 54 positions and then you buy it, right? So it's exactly the same thing. And then what happens is Vasan runs the Ananda Vigadan, and it is in that magazine that there is a novel by Premchand, Munshi Premchand, which is being translated by Ambuja Mal and it is being serialized. And K. Subramaniam, the film producer, comes to buy the serial rights and to make a movie out of that film, out of that story. And M.S. Subbulakshmi becomes the heroine. That's a different story altogether. But Vasan gets interested in film distribution because of that film. And 2 years later, when Subramaniam's studio burns to the ground on Cathedral Road, Vasan acquires that studio and starts Gemini Studios thereafter. And that is when he moves into this particular property, which is called Sudarshan. And nothing that Vasan did could ever be in half measure. He was, after all, a big movie mogul, so everything had to be large as life and twice as natural. Chandralekha made in 1948. Everybody says Chandralekha released in 1948. But we forget that Chandralekha started production in 1942. It took 6 years in the making. And he had sunk every rupee that he had in it. Lastly, he needed 21,000 to finish the movie, didn't know where he was going to go. His mother produced all the jewels that she had saved and she said, pawn them all, get the money and finish the film. The mother was a bigger entrepreneur than even Vasan was. Film, when it was released, grossed 3 crores and it catapulted him into a different bracket altogether. That was the first South Indian movie to release all over India and become a hit all across the nation. The famous drum dance of T.R. Rajakumari. And then the motto of the studios, when the bugles blow, there will be a show. Two fat children wearing loincloths and blowing a bugle. That was the logo. And there was, as Ashoka Mitran said, there was no trace of reality in any film that Vasan made. In fact, the realistic films he made, they bombed in the box office. Whereas all these films with Raja Rani and things like that. And in Chandralekha, for instance, there is this scene where the hero is confronted by an army of men with guns. And then they will all put the guns to the side and then indulge in fisticuffs with him for the next fight sequence. Why they didn't shoot him dead is something that we don't know. The public never questioned it. They all
still continuing.
Yeah, it continues even now. Then Avayar, made even better, bigger. And Avayar was released not in one day. Today is Judges' Night. All the High Court judges and lawyers will come to the theatre to see Avayar. Tomorrow is Government Servants' Day. All IAS officers will come. No, they will, invited. So for 1 month, pre-release publicity. And then they will all write. Next day when they are coming out, they'll be interviewed outside the theatre by the Gemini Studios people. So what do you think of the movie? Fantastic. So that will be recorded and next day it will be played before the news reel in all the theatres. Anand Vigadan will carry interviews. C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer giving a statement. So the public was in a feverish excitement by the time Avayar is released. So it had to become a bigger hit. Then one day Rajaji comes to see the movie. He's been invited. He's the Chief Minister of Madras Presidency or Madras State. He arrives to see the film. And then having seen the film, goes back in absolute silence. Vasan and Rajaji had hated each other most cordially right through. But now Rajaji had arrived to see the film. And while leaving, nobody dared ask Rajaji what he thought of it. He went home in deathly silence and that was it. But that was enough publicity. Rajaji had seen the film. 1 month later, again in the evening, a car comes and stops outside Willingdon Theatre. Chief Minister in those days travelled all alone in a car. He didn't have a huge security convoy and all that. The driver comes and buys a ticket in the counter. The theatre manager notices that Rajaji, the driver of Rajaji was also a celebrity apparently. Rajaji driver ticket vaanga vandirukkaru. So immediately phone call goes to Vasan saying Rajaji has come for a second time to see the movie. Vasan descends on the theatre with the entire Gemini Studios. Rajaji watches the movie for a second time. And now bigger publicity. Rajaji has come a second time, again in deathly silence. Goes away, but the deed has been done. Movie is grossing, minting money for Vasan. 30 years later, we discover what Rajaji has written in his diary. Went to see Vasan's Avayar. Most execrable and horrible film produced. But with so much at stake, what can one do? What did he mean by this? I have no idea. My only conjecture is that Vasan was a great donor to the Congress party. There must have been pressure from up north. Nehru or somebody must have called him and said, the movie requires buoying up. Vasan will otherwise go down the tube. You better go down and make one more visit. So Rajaji comes and watches the film. Anyway, that is not the... Oh, we are already at 10:50. Why did he come the second time? Maybe again Nehru had called him and said, Jaiye, ek aur baar dekh ke aiye, or whatever it was. Anyway, it happened. Sarvepalli Gopal's wife, Mrs. Gopal, lives there. Now anyway, this is a stretch with a lot of history and we are getting on in time. So Vasan's daughter's wedding is going to be celebrated in 1951 or 52. Daughter has to be given a bungalow that is as impressive as the one in which Vasan is living. So Vasan vacates the bungalow and he buys India House, which is down the road opposite the Music Academy where the Acropolis building is standing today, and shifts into that, and that becomes Gemini House. And then the daughter's wedding is celebrated. Once again, everybody in Madras arriving in Gemini Studios to witness the wedding, but Vasan feels, I have not looked after the people properly. So for 1 month, every day, music and dance performances in this house to invited audience. Today all the judges, tomorrow all the government servants, today all the musicians, police people. This is how Vasan built his empire. And then, you know, the son gets married 5 years later in Gemini House. Music Academy at that time is demolished and it's an empty slot because the building is yet to come up. That place is hired for the wedding opposite the house. Every Gemini Studio employee gets a rosewood box with a dhoti, an angavastram and a sari and a blouse bit meant for the husband and the wife. Now naturally the women are not happy with the sari they got. Mrs. Vasan says, Some of you who are unhappy can come home and exchange it for other saris. Next day the traffic is blocked on Edward Elliot's Road because Gemini had 600 employees. 600 women thronging the doorstep to come and exchange their saris in Gemini House. And the procession, the wedding procession taking place with police permission over here, 6 Nagaswaram artists, the biggest names that you can name, all of them walking down this stretch and then making the turn and going back to Gemini House. That is how Vasan lived. But behind this, on this stretch, lived the Nobel laureate S. Chandrasekhar. Chandrasekhar's father, C.S. Iyer, who was the brother of the other Nobel laureate C.V. Raman. This is where he lived, and from here everything behind was one large house that was known as Chandra Vilas, which is why you've got a street called Chandrabagh Avenue even today. And if R.K. Salai was snobbish, Chandrabagh Avenue was more snobbish among the snobbish. That is where T.R. Venkatramana Shastri's daughters and all lived. They would rarely speak to anybody. If you ask them where they lived, Chandrabagh Avenue. And that meant that you couldn't speak to them thereafter, you couldn't even address them. So they were the kind of people to whom the Sringeri Swamigal would give a personal audience, and then they would move with ministers and people like that. They would discuss the English translation of the Ramayana even in the 1950s. VSV, the great humorist, would write about how women of Edward Elliot's Road in those days, they would wear spectacles, play tennis in saris and drive cars, while the men would wear vibhuti and do bhajane after coming back from court every day in the evening. He meant all those women who lived in Chandrabagh Avenue. And anyway, so we come to C.S. Iyer. C.S. Iyer was a great musicologist. His son Chandrasekhar was of course the Nobel laureate, but C.S. Iyer was a member of the Music Academy, was a violinist who fancied that he knew everything. His opponents wrote that he was a megalomaniac who represented music in fractions. He was Accountant General of the Greater India Peninsular Railway, GIPR. And he lived here and would go and attend the Music Academy's annual sessions. And his sworn enemy was Chaudhaya, the violinist. On one occasion, they came to blows because C.S. Iyer accused Chaudhaya of playing inferior music. Chaudhaya took his violin like a club and went to beat C.S. Iyer on the head. And the Music Academy meeting was adjourned for the day. There was everything had to get over that day. Next day, the committee declared that the academy is finished because we've had unruly behavior. But what they didn't realize that is what the public wanted to see. So next day, there were 3 times the crowd that had come to witness the arrangements and to see what fresh battles were happening in the Music Academy. So C.S. Iyer in some ways was the man who really put the Music Academy on the pedestal that we know. Now C.S. Iyer's family and the house next door, Rishiyur Subramanya Iyer, there was a kind of a relationship between the two houses where the sons and the daughters of the two houses would marry repeatedly, till nobody ever knew who was related to whom in which way or the other. Rishiyur Subramanya Iyer is as commemoration worthy as Dr. E.V. Srinivasan because his daughter was a child widow as well, and she was R.S. Subbulakshmi, whose photograph I have just put up for you. Subbulakshmi writes that when she was 10 years old and the father was teaching in the teachers college in Saidapet, she heard a scream and looked out of the window to see a group of women standing around a 3-year-old girl, and they were holding her down while a man was shaving her head, and they were removing all the jewelry in the body of that 3-year-old child. And she asked what was happening, and her neighbors told her that her husband has died, this 3-year-old girl's husband, and she is now going to be a child widow for the rest of her life. So Subbulakshmi was scarred. She was always afraid the same thing would happen to her. She was married at the age of 10. At the age of 12, her husband died. And her father told her, contrary to what is happening, I am not going to shave your head, just as what E.V. Srinivasan did. And he wanted to get his daughter educated, made her join the Presidency School in Egmore, then enrolled her in the Presidency College, where she would leave at 5 o'clock in the morning in a rickshaw so that nobody would see her going to college. Otherwise, people would stand and shout accusations on her saying that she was selling herself in order to study. It was against the dharma. And she would go, and she failed in mathematics, which was her favorite subject, because everybody would torment her while she was studying, while she was coming back home. And finally, they had to shift her to a different college where she studied botany and finally graduated, winning gold medal, and then calls herself Sister Subbulakshmi because she says, I want to be a sister to all the child widows of Madras Presidency, and then joins government service and starts a widows' home where women can come and stay and then be educated and then take on a profession. They can become teachers, nurses, doctors. Some of them want to get married as well. Subbulakshmi lived down that street in Rishiyur Subramanya Iyer's house. Now the houses are no longer there. Subbulakshmi's story is one of the most remarkable stories. She had a shaven-headed aunt called Chitti, who was her pillar of support, and between the two of them, they even kidnapped women who were going to get married to men who were 30 years elder to them and things like that, and brought them down, educated them and trained them and made them different people altogether. Sister Subbulakshmi founded several educational institutions. In T Nagar you have the Sharda Vidyalaya. That was started by Sister Subbulakshmi. Vidya Mandir school was started by her. So several educational institutions were started by her. She died only in the 1980s, a remarkable personality who lived down this road and who was the recipient, the one recipient of the Kaisar-e-Hind medal from the government of India, which I mentioned to you. Let's go further. Okay, as Sharda reminds me at this point, I forgot to mention, we have a grandson of Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan in our midst. Keshav Desiraju is right here. Keshav, can you please identify yourself? That is Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan's grandson. Keshav was in the IAS and has just retired and moved back to Madras City. Before we have from here we have a long walk, but I must tell you about the history of the last property before we cross the road and go up to the flyover. All this was one house that was called Gopal Bagh. Gopal Bagh was the house of Sir Vepa Ramesam. Vepa Ramesam, who was again a person who joined the law, whose first love was mathematics, but joined the law, became a lawyer, finally wound up as a judge of the Madras High Court, and is remembered for a very peculiar reason. He believed in the anti-Malthusian League, which is that you had to prevent the population of the country from growing beyond a point. And he and Sir P.S. Sivaswamy Iyer, who lived on the opposite side, between the two of them, they began the first family planning ideas in the country, realizing that the Indian population would one day explode. But Vepa Ramesam had no right to talk about anti-Malthusian League because he had 13 children, all born of the same wife, and towards the end of his life became so vague about who was his child and who was his grandchild that everything was very confusing to him. And P.S. Sivaswamy Iyer had no children. So Satyamurthy said that it is very interesting that birth control is advocated by two people, one who had no control and the other has known no birth. So it's very interesting that they lived on the same road. That is Pappu Satyanarayana's property, Justice Pappu Satyanarayana. You also have the house of Children's Garden School, which is a heritage building that is there. And Children's Garden School again was a historic property because S.R. Kaivar lived there. Raghavendra Kaivar, who was the sanitary commissioner of the Madras Corporation, he did not believe in going to a dentist and extracted his own molar and it became septic and died an agonizing death. One of the great lunatics of Madras. The very thought of it makes your intestines shrivel up. And his son, Sethu Rao, became an ICS officer, and then they donated the house to L.N. Sharma. L.N. Sharma, who was a German, who came down to Madras having joined the Sanskrit scholar Sharma, who was, and the two of them, they began the L.N. Sharma High School over there, which even today is a school that, educates girls of people, families that do not have a great income. And it does a phenomenal service even today. That school is inside in the same old bungalow. I asked the people who lived in Manonidhi, which was the house next to it, who lived here. They said, Yaro, English Theriyade, which is typical Mylapore behavior. You never know who is your neighbor or you pretend that you don't know.
Manonidhi was Sudarshana Iyengar.
Sudarshana Iyengar. And only if there is an income tax raid or there is a death, you will go to your neighbor's house. Otherwise, you'll never bother about who lives next door.
I see Sudarshana Iyengar is also...
After the Madras Andhra, P. Satyanarayana,
he became a judge of the Andhra High Court. That's right, yeah.
I think Sudarshana Iyengar is a wonderful history.
Sudarshana Iyengar, that house which is called Manonidhi, they used to run a timber business called MD Brothers and Sons. And that was one of the most successful timber business houses. And of course, lots of stories about it, but that's for a different walk. Here you have the nameplate of the house, Chintamani. and there you have the last remnant of that old house, which is that octagonal tower. Yeah, this house is called Chintamani, and just that tower is the only remnant of what was this old bungalow that stretched from the earlier compound right up to the end of the street. This was the residence of the Diwan of Pudukota, Seshaya Shastri. Seshaya Shastri, who was famous, notorious in many ways because he exercised iron control over the administration of Pudukota state. So his sons and grandsons, all of them lived in this particular house. Just behind you, you have the electricity board installations, the EB. But this was the tram shed of Madras till 1957. This was one tram shed, and the other tram shed was where Periyar Tidal, the Dinatandi offices are on Punamali High Road. This is where the two tram lines, at the end of the day, the trams would come trundling down and stop. And even today, if you look deep inside, you'll find two asbestos covered sheds which are very, very high. You can't make it out from here, but you need to walk a little further, you'll be able to see it. Those are the original tram sheds. And next to that, there used to be two very beautiful concrete tram sheds which they demolished only around 5 or 6 years ago, and for no earthly reason. They could have had all their transformers inside it and they could have been probably better maintained, but they ended up demolishing it. All this side was once the property of the Nawabs of Arcot. Even today it is still with the trusts of the Nawab. So everybody who lives here lives on 100-year leases on the properties that starting from here. And down this you had a house called Perunkulam House. I'll take you to the last portion of it that survives. There are the last surviving pieces of the huge property, and it goes to quite some distance down Roypeta High Road also. Now look behind you and you will find that there is a building right at the rear, and then this, which is all the Reliance Center today, this was a house called Perunkulam House. And Perunkulam was the village from which A. Madhavaya came. A. Madhavaya, he was actually a salt excise and liquor inspector for the government, but he is better known as one of the pioneering writers in Tamil. And though born in a Brahmin family, he attacked all religious hypocrisy, which is why he is largely forgotten in the world of literature. He fell between two stools. One is he was a Brahmin advocating rationalism. So neither the Brahmins nor the rationalists wanted to have anything to do with Madhavaya. But his writings were far ahead of his times. And he wrote this novel called Padmavati Charitram, which was very much in the lines of Vedanayakam Pillai's novels, Pratapa Mudaliyar Charitram and others. So one of the earliest Tamil novels. And when his daughter became a widow, yet another reformer on the same stretch, educated her in the teeth of opposition and made her a school teacher, which is why he was ostracized, and so he had to give up his job in Tirunelveli and other places and move to Madras city, where he felt that people would accept it a little better. Madhavaya's son, and that building behind was where there was a press that belonged to Madhavaya. This is where he brought out some of his books and some of his magazines from, and then when he died it all stopped, of course. One son became a judge of the Madras High Court, Justice M. Anantanarayanan, Chief Justice of the Madras High Court. The other son is a person whom we all remember for his writing on nature, M. Krishnan, who was one of the pioneering photographers of animals in the black and white era. Birds, snakes, lions, you name it, and he used to have a column for years in the Statesman in Calcutta which would talk about wildlife in India, and all of us grew up on it, particularly those of us growing up in Calcutta. The English was so beautiful, and the way he described these animals to the smallest detail, and his excellent black and white photographs. At that time I didn't know, but later when I moved here and then I began reading the Shruti magazine very regularly, I realized that he was as much an authority on music as he was on wildlife. And he has taken some of the most stunning photographs of Bala Saraswati, the dancer. And there is one particular study of his which is remarkable. He had seen a sculpture in a particular temple where the dancer has struck a particular pose, and he felt that physiologically it is not possible for such a posture to have been struck. the hands in a particular position and one leg lifted and another leg in a particular angle, he felt this cannot happen, it's not possible. And then while watching a dance performance, he realized that for a split second between two poses, it happens. So he got that dancer to come to his studio, got her to repeat that, and took that photograph and then published it in Shruti magazine with the sculpture that he had seen so many years earlier. And this particular, that is the kind of detail to which M. Krishnan went. He was a remarkable writer, and his wife Indu, who was a Maharashtrian, and they both lived here till each one of them died well into the 1990s, which is when the trust took back the property and then developed it into this particular building. One of Madhavaya's daughters married a doctor, S.T. Achar, and he used to live in the next house. He was the first doctor to specialize as a pediatrician in this city, and later becomes the superintendent of the government children's hospital, which is in Egmore. So he lived in the property next to that. Ramanuja Iyengar standing with a proprietary air outside a building, Ariyakudi Ramanuja Iyengar, and the building that you see behind is the building that was here. That was called Devakotai House, and this was the residence of the Zamindars of Devakotai, the city residence of the Zamindars of Devakotai, ALAR family. And they had consistently eroded the estate of Ramnad till they became the Zamindars of Devakotai. And the Raja of Ramnad became an insolvent practically in the process, and then had to be administered by the court of wards before the estate was restored to him. But the Zamindars lived here, and Chokaya Chetty was the last of the great Devakotai Zamindars. And Ariyakudi Ramanuja Iyengar, whose photo you see here, he's almost looking as though he's the owner of this house. He and Chokaya Chetty were like brothers, and it was believed that Ramanuja Iyengar could sing very well only when Chokaya Chetty was present in the audience. It was almost to that extent. And it was also believed that Ramanuja Iyengar's lady, Dhanammal, was actually an inheritance from one of the ALAR family. They had tired of her and then passed her on to Ramanuja Iyengar, and then he had lived happily ever after with that particular lady. Chokaya Chetty, of course, rarely ever administered his estates, but his wife was made of sterner stuff. So the story goes that once when he was traveling somewhere, a musician comes to meet Chokaya Chetty because he was known to be very generous. And the wife says, you can stay here, we have a guest house, they'll feed you every day. So the musician stays for 3 days. And every day they inquire of him whether he would like to have curds when he has his meals, and he says yes. So a big cup of curd is supplied to him every day. 4th day Chokaya Chetty arrives, musician meets him, and then he says, I need some money. Chokaya Chetty gives him money. Just then the wife arrives and says, I have supplied curds to him for 3 days, subtract the money for that and the rest of the money you can give. So she was maintaining an account in her own right. The feeding was at his expense, but the curds were coming at her expense. So that's the way the Chettiar families kind of manage their wealth. And the very interesting story about Chokaya Chetty is he is in the academy listening to Ramanuja Iyengar sing, when a telegram is delivered to him post haste by one of the boys in Devakotai house saying, father dying, return to Devakota at once. So he scribbles on the back, in Ramanujam's concert stop, will arrive once it gets over, and then sends it back. When he dies, they discover only IOUs in his cupboard. There is no money. He has lived far beyond his estate, and much of the property is sold. Remember when I told you AVM was renting out property from the Devakota Chettiars in Karaikudi and running his studio? He then comes here and buys land there and builds his house. The irony is finally the whole thing is bought by AVM. The tenant in Karaikudi ends up buying the property of the Zamindar on Edward Elliott's Road. Everything from there right up to Saravana Bhavan is even today owned by the AVM charities. And you can see the last remnant of Devakotai house. When you cross and you look into the Saravana Bhavan car park, you will find the Mena Preview Theatre there. That is the servants' quarters of the old Devakotai house. We're just finishing, and 3 great personalities to be told of here before we wind up for the evening. The first of these is this one, and this is clearly the oldest property on this entire stretch. The history of this property goes back to 1798, which is a good 40 years prior to the police commissioner's office coming up at that corner. Has everybody come? I don't want to miss anybody. Yeah. So 1798 is the history of this property, when Benjamin Sullivan, who was the Advocate General of the Supreme Court of Madras, he acquires this place and he builds his house, which is why everything from here going down is called Sullivan's Garden. Even today it goes by the same name, though we've changed it later. Benjamin Sullivan lived here, and then the Society for the Promotion of the Gospel in India acquires the place after Sullivan dies, and they set up the Saint Ebba School over here from the 1840s onwards. And that is how the Saint Ebba's building, which is actually the Saint Ebba's building that you see, is Sullivan's house. And they have been restoring it with great difficulty. And one of the reasons why they have not demolished the property but only restored it is because of the angel in human shape who lived opposite, Sivasailam, who gave them the idea that if you destroyed the building and built it up, you will again have problems in maintaining it. On the other hand, you can make money consistently by renting out the car parking space in this every time there is an event in this whole road. And thanks to him, they have been steadily earning money and they have not thought of demolishing. So one heritage property survives with great difficulty on this entire stretch. Opposite, you've got this house called Sudharma, which is 5 acres, starting from this end and going up to the point where Woodlands Hotel really starts. And this is retaining its original plot contours right from the time that it was developed somewhere in the 1840s or so. And in the 1880s, Sir P.S. Sivaswamy Iyer acquires this property. P.S. Sivaswamy Iyer, who, not in the 1880s, actually early 1900s is when he acquires this property. Prior to that, it was the residence of a British officer, ICS officer. And he, of course, had a phenomenal career in the law before he becomes Advocate General, then becomes member of the Governor's Executive Council, from which he retires in 1917. Then he becomes a member of the Imperial Legislative Council in Delhi, comes back and lives here. Now, the Sivaswamy Iyer couple had no children, and therefore he decided that much of his wealth would go towards education, and he supports the National Girls' School, which is in Mylapore, and then he starts a school in his village, which is Tirukattupalli, and his wife predeceases him. Therefore, much of the wealth, he decides that there is no point in living in a house of this size till the end of his life. So he sells the house and vests all the money of the sale into the schools, which is why the school becomes the Lady Sivaswamy Iyer Girls' School after that in his name. He had a wonderful library, and you had to be a personal friend of his to access the library, and he would observe the way you treated the books. If you treated it slightly badly, you were no longer his friend and you were no longer welcome. These books were his children effectively. So you had to hold the books at a certain angle, and so that the binding would not split, and then you could only read it this way. And he, if at all, he very rarely loaned you a book. There was a register in which he would write down your name and expect you to sign on it and say that this is the date on which the book was given, and on this date the book would be returned. Now, when the man retired and then sold the house, he sold it to a family. He was very keen that his neighbor Anantharamakrishnan should acquire this property. Anantharamakrishnan had just moved into 6 grounds at the end of this road into a house called Kalyan Mahal, which he had built with great difficulty, because at that time Anantharamakrishnan had not become the great industrialist that he was. He was a director of Simpson and Company, but he had not become this magnate of Amalgamations Limited. And so he was very reluctant, and he said, you know, I am not going to be able to afford acquiring this property, and they let it go. Then a family offered Sivaswamy Iyer more money for it, but he said no, I have already entered into a sale transaction with one particular seller, and he moved into a blind end which is today called Saint Ebba's Avenue. That is where he lived with a cook to whom money was given in trust, saying that when Sivaswamy Iyer dies, the cook should spend it on the funeral, and the balance money the cook should keep as an annuity for himself. So that is how arrangements were made, and it was virtually a 1-bedroomed house into which he moved from this 5-acre property so that he could fund the school. The books were all donated to Vivekananda College. 5 years ago, I get a call from a second-hand bookseller saying that our Periya library has been abandoned by the Vivekananda College with a fisherman on the beach, and I have acquired the entire collection. Would you like to come and see it? So I go. Then I find, much to my shock, that all of Sivaswamy Iyer's books have been offloaded by the college because nobody is reading them anymore. They are all rubber stamped from the library of P.S. Sivaswamy Iyer. And then he wanted me to buy it. I said, I don't have that kind of space, I don't have that kind of money. And I acquired 3 books from that. And the others, I don't even know what happened to it. But this is how great collections come to it. There must have been at least 500 or 600 books, which had all been abandoned. So Anantaramakrishnan continues living in Kalyan Mahal. Then one day he realizes that his neighbor, you can imagine this was the neighbor. So there was this family that was living here. The next neighbor was M. Murugappa Chettiar of the Murugappa group. That was a house called the Laurels. During the Second World War, that house had been serving as the Madras Stock Exchange on the first floor. The ground floor, the Murugappa Chettiar family was living. They found that the house was a little cramped for their personal use. Naturally, when you're living on 5 acres, you feel that it is a little cramped and you're not able to manage with it. You're looking for something bigger. And the Maharaja of Mysore was living on Santhom High Road in 7.5 acres. And he was not keen on retaining the property. So Chamundeshwari Bagh became the house of the Murugappa Chettiar family, and they decided to sell this. And Anantaramakrishnan came to know that the hotelier Krishna Rao was eyeing the property. He was terrified that this property would also be acquired by Krishna Rao and smells of masala dosa would waft into his kitchen. Overnight he acquired this place and converted it into the registered office of Amalgamations Limited, so that the hotel would not come within smelling distance of his kitchen. Then, so I must finish the last 2. So let's finish Anantaramakrishnan before we go to Krishna Rao. Let's have Krishna Rao give us the last word in this walk. Anantaramakrishnan starts as a chartered accountant with Fraser and Ross. In those days, not CA but a GDA, and starts with Fraser and Ross. Goes to audit the accounts of Simpson and Company. Simpsons are so impressed with his auditor that they actually write to Fraser and Ross saying that we'd like to employ him as our manager finance. Having started off as manager finance, becomes a general manager and finally becomes a director on the board of the company by 1942-43. And in 1945, convinces the company that independence is around the corner and lots of English companies are going to be sold and let's acquire them all. The company promotes a holding company called Amalgamations Limited. Can you believe even the name is Amalgamations, so that you amalgamate various businesses. So Addison and Company, George Oakes and Company. One day in a restaurant he comes to know that the mail is going to be sold, acquires the mail and Higginbotham's overnight. Spencer's comes to him on a platter, refuses because they sell whiskey and they run a 5-star hotel where meat is offered to guests. So says that is not part of my business acquisitions. Then acquires T. Staines and Company in Coimbatore with several hundred acres of tea estates in Ooty and the Nilgiris. No stopping this man. And then in 48 ushers in the diesel revolution in India. Prior to that, all heavy vehicles are running on petrol. Imports a Perkins diesel engine, convinces a truck operator on Valaja Road, in Voltax Road, to convert his lorry from a petrol driven lorry into a diesel lorry. And they actually pay that fellow for converting it. And that becomes such a success that Simpsons gets into diesel engine import and then diesel engine assembly. Becomes a multi-millionaire after that. And then in 1947, when India becomes independent, starts India's first automotive component manufacturing company, when no automobiles are made in India. At that time starts a company called India Pistons to make pistons for cars and trucks when they will be made in India. So even prior to knowing cars and buses are coming, and nobody could operate the foundries which were so heavy. So Victor Watts, who was the manager, recruits convicts from the Madras prison and employs them in the India Pistons so that they would run the foundry. So this is a way in which they built up, and then moves everything into Huzur Gardens in Sembium, which is even today a green estate with several manufacturing facilities located in it. Such a fast-paced life had to have its own price. So by the 1950s, heavily diabetic, with his kidneys failing him, high blood pressure, and then T.T. Krishnamachari comes to apply the final pressure on him by continuously scuttling everything that he wants to do, because TVS, this is the great Agraharam wars on the opposite sides of Mount Road, because TTK is very clear that the TVS family has to be promoted, so they move into Madras. And of course, each one grows on its own merit, there is no denying it. But the final blow is when Anantaramakrishnan dies. when a huge quantum of estate duty is slapped on the family.
He makes
Estate
85%.
85. He makes it 85%
Only
only
for
to
the-
finish Anantaramakrishna. Rajaji arrives for the funeral and says, if industrial labor made Anantaramakrishnan sick, estate duty actually killed him. That was his comment when he arrives for the condolence. And the children are all very young. Sivasailam is only in his late 20s when his father was not even 60 when he died. The rest of them are much younger and nobody has any idea as to what's going to happen to the future. Sivasailam contacts Nani Palkiwala. Palkiwala then comes down, discusses the merits of the case, fights it for 15 long years and goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. Finally, the figure is brought down to a few, I think it's around 50 lakhs or whatever it is, which the family eventually settles. Palkiwala never took a single rupee for the case. Sivasailam keeps telling him, you have to take money, you have to take. Finally, at the end of their lives, Sivasailam writes a letter to Palkiwala saying, we waited long enough, I think a figure has to be named. He says 100,000 rupees is what I would like to take from you as a token. And finally, that money is also donated to Shankar Nethralaya. So that is how that case ends. Now, as I said, that was Anantaramakrishnan, Sivasailam and everybody. And finally, let's come to Krishna Rao. Krishna Rao comes down from Udupi, where his family is cooking for the Udupi Krishna temple. He doesn't think his life is going to be spent in cooking for the Krishna temple. Comes to Madras and becomes a cook. And becomes a idli grinder in a restaurant in Acharappan Street. It's an eatery. And the owner is so impressed with his diligence, gives him the task of running a new eatery that he has set up 2 streets away. So Krishna Rao runs that place very successfully. Then somewhere along the line has a dream that he must start a hotel of his own. On Roypeta High Road, the Ramnad Raja is very keen on getting rid of his palace, which is called Woodlands House. And there is a contractor in Mysore who takes it on and wants to run it as a hotel, a 25-bedroom hotel. He doesn't have the strength to run it as a hotel by himself. So Krishna Rao comes to him and says, I'll take it on a sublease from you, because the palace was called Woodlands, we'll call it Woodlands Hotel. Every day in the morning goes to Central Station, stands there, solicits passengers as they are coming down and tells them 5 rupees for a night with breakfast thrown in, nice airy garden, lovely bedrooms. And so people slowly start coming to Woodlands and it becomes a great success. And everybody who is somebody in Madras wants to go and stay in Woodlands. The owner has other ideas. By the late 40s, he thinks if this man is making a success out of it, I can make a bigger success out of it. So he terminates the lease. So Krishna Rao wants to leave and Krishna Rao then acquires this place. Because that was called Woodlands, he calls this New Woodlands. It was still run till 3 years ago as a hotel by the old contractor. And it was one of the shadiest joints, but it had fantastic sit-down lunches. Woodlands, yeah. And this man was running New Woodlands over here, that man running Old Woodlands. Krishna Rao and Simpson's family had one point of contention, apart from the smell of the idli and the dosa. There was one particular seat in the Music Academy's front row that Krishna Rao doted upon. I don't know what was the secret behind that seat. But if somebody else took that seat, Krishna Rao would not come into the academy, he would leave. Mrs. Sivasailam fell in love with the same seat. So between Mrs. Sivasailam and Krishna Rao, there was a huge competition as to who would sit on the seat, much to the delight of the rest of us in the Music Academy who would watch this tug of war going on every day. Finally, Mrs. Sivasailam won hands down for the simple reason that every day in the morning a driver would take one car and go and park it there and sit in that seat. Mrs. Sivasailam would come with another car from here going up to there and get into that first driver number 1 will vacate that seat, Mrs. Sivasailam would sit. Driver number 1 will drive out car number 1 and come away. Driver number 2 will park in the place where car number 1 was parked and wait in the car. At particular time, driver number 1 will come back. Driver number 2 will take Mrs. Sivasailam home. Driver number 1 will then keep the seat warm for Mrs. Sivasailam and so on. So Krishna Rao didn't stand an earthly. He would come and smoke in the lobby and growl and go back. This is how life went on Radhakrishnan Salai. We've come to the end of the tour. I must end it with how it all ended. I think they had a great time as long as they wanted to, all these families. They would close the doors at 8 o'clock and everything would fall silent over here. Every house had 40 people. father, mother, 5 children. Sons invariably came to no good. The daughters were far more successful. Many of them went abroad, became professors in universities, married Germans, Americans. As I always said, Janaki came back as Janaki Hoffelmeier from there. And then a new line in the Radhakrishnan Road history was started somewhere in New York or whatever it was. Invariably, the sons didn't work much because the fathers had left behind so much of wealth. Then came the brain drain. So the next generation went abroad, leaving behind 2 people. And then the pressure to sell, and over a period of time, all these houses, by the time I saw them in the 1990s, doors were falling apart, gardens were not being maintained properly, there were tenants not vacating, and then everything went one by one by one, all the houses. I've actually seen each house being demolished, and you admired the old house, and then suddenly you found a gaping hole. Then you found a real monstrosity coming up in place of the old house, and then you think about the old house, and then you shed a few tears for it, and then you pass on. But then there are still some beautiful houses left, and they tell you the story of what Edward Elliot's Road was all about at one point of time. Thank you so much for having been such a wonderful audience, and I think this place we should take the group photo here. Let's take it here.